You're listening to a podcast of spurious morality.
Hello and welcome to a podcast of Spurious Morality. I'm Johnstone and this week I'm joined by Connor. Hello, Connor.
Hello.
And we're doing it's a bit of a sequel to an episode we did in our first series, Not Who. We are discussing non-Doctor Who things by Big Finish, because there's quite a lot of them. And we kind of zeroed in on a few Big Finish classics and originals last time that we sort of quite liked, and we've listened to a lot more since, so we're going to zero in on even more Big Finish classics and originals. And I've been looking forward to this one. I kind of wish we'd done it sooner, but we've had a busy schedule. So yeah, it's going to be good to chat about not Doctor Who for a week. Yeah, so we've got a list of things we want to talk about, but before we kind of get going, just talk about what non-Doctor Who Big Finish you have listened to recently. Connor, go ahead.
Yes, so in preparation for this, I listened to a couple. I'd always intended to do sort of a run of the Big Finish classics, of the H.G. Wells stories that they had done. And I was able to. I've been really looking forward to getting to do those in a run. I've now done those all in a row, which was a little bit of a Big Finish bucket list to get through. I also listened to Transference, which is possibly the best of the Big Finish originals. It certainly would be a contender with Cicero for that in my book. And I also listened to, I have listened to them all before, but I've listened just for this to the most recent Captain Scarlet. I used to watch Captain Scarlet a lot when I was younger, and it was always a favourite. So it's always nice to go and get into the Big Finish version of it.
Yeah, I'd agree with you there about Transference. It definitely gives Cicero a run for its money. I do still think Cicero is the best. Sort of non-franchisey, non-property thing to come out of Big Finish. And it does sort of tie in quite closely to Doctor Who, because obviously we've got Tartarus. But yeah, Transference is, I think it's great. It's your sort of classic Sunday night BBC 9 p.m. thriller. You know, it's quite meaty as well. It's 8 episodes long, 8-hour-long episodes. It's a really sort of big release. It's a big story, and it's just great. And it's great to hear Alice Kingston in a different role, and Warren Brown the different role, and all the other stuff. Yeah, I think Transference is great. I've not heard all of the H.G. Wells, but I have done sort of the recommended listening we agreed on for this. We're going to zero in on 2 H.G. Wells adaptations. And I enjoyed listening to those because they're both, well, there's one that I am familiar with and one that I haven't really had any contact with at all. It was virtually a new story for me. So it's going to be good to chat about those. We'll go straight in then to the first of those H.G. Wells adaptations, and it is the one that I know, and it is the one that I've sort of experienced in a few different ways before. It's The Martian Invasion of Earth, which is, of course, an adaptation of Mars Attacks, the 1999 Tim Burton film.
I thought it was the long-awaited Ice Warrior-based sequel to the Dalek Invasion of Earth.
Yeah. Alas, no, it's War of the Worlds. It is War of the Worlds.
I find it both really, really annoying and really, really funny that that they're not allowed to call it the War of the Worlds, because everyone and their uncle, like, I don't know that anyone is going to take the Martian invasion of Earth seriously as a title. Like, I always refer to it as the War of the Worlds. Um, despite the fact that it's called the Martian invasion of Earth, it's just a real, real pity that they're not. For what boils down to really silly legal reasons, that they're not
I
allowed to
mean,
call it the War of the Worlds.
it's obviously a copyright thing, and it's presumably due to a bloke called Jeff. Um, but yeah, that's kind of the first thing I was going to ask. Really, do you think it works as a sort of alternative title? Um, and it's very easy to go, yeah, maybe the Martian invasion of Earth isn't the best title for it, but I doubt the two of us sat here could come up with anything particularly better. Actually, it
That's
still
the
describes the story very well.
that's the thing. Anything else would probably be trying too hard. Like, no matter what title it has, it's still not going to be the War of the Worlds. It's one of the most iconic titles in the history of literature. Um, and as you say, there's nothing we're going to come up with here is going to be better. Um, and I guess you can say that it's a cute nod from the guys who make the Doctor Who audios. Um, towards what can we're not allowed to use the proper title. What can we call it? Let's do a Doctor Who reference. That it's an okay title. I don't think there's anything better than the War of the Worlds, so I don't really have a problem with this.
I think I guess the sort of the shortcoming is that with it does feel like a slightly tongue-in-cheek reference to the Dalek invasion of Earth. And it's not a tongue-in-cheek story in any way, shape, or form at all. It's a very, very serious piece of audio drama. It's a very, very serious story. Yes, it's sci-fi. It's fantastical, but at the time it was written, and even now, it's sort of a kind of groundbreaking story. Really, it's the archetype for pretty much any Earth is invaded story that has come since, be it in Doctor Who or anywhere else, or the fiction, whatever. And yeah, it feels as though it's not quite a serious enough a title. It feels somewhat flippant because it's referencing slightly Doctor Who, which I never thought I'd not like a Doctor Who reference, but I think this might be the one that I just don't quite get on with. Title aside, though, I think it's a great. It's quite a long one. It's longer than the other H.G. Wells adaptations I listened to. It's got a good extra sort of 20 minutes on it. But yeah, what did you think of it? What are your thoughts on the Martian invasion of Earth, War of the Worlds adaptation?
When this got announced, my jaw dropped because I could not believe that Big Finish had got the guy from The Hobbit to come and do, and I'm not talking about Sylvester McCoy there either. I'm talking about Richard Armitage, to come and do this. You can only imagine my reaction when I found out later he was going to play Rassilon in Gallifrey. But I was really impressed that they were able to get him, and I was delighted that it was for a project like this. Because I've always said that the classics range is one of Big Finish's strongest. It's been mentioned on this podcast before. I don't think it was by me, in all fairness. I can't remember who said it, but someone pointed out that each and every one of these productions is a sort of passion project for the people who work on it.
Yes.
It's stories that they love and have I suppose have their own history with. They've read them. They're invested. They're really invested in adapting these stories, and they're heavyweights as well. They're called classics for a reason. And I'm always delighted when a new one gets announced. There's very few, possibly, there's very few stories that you could say are more classic than the War of the Worlds or the Martian invasion of Earth. So it's got a superb cast. I really, really love it. It sounds brilliant. The sound design, the amount of effort that has got into um, producing the sounds of the Martian machines. Their heat ray sounds amazing. And the cast are all fantastic. I could sing the praises of the range all day, and it's always for the same reasons, because it's such a high quality production each and every time.
Do you think that because Big Finish are adapting something that's so highly regarded and well loved, do you think that it just makes them up the bar a little bit? You know, not to say that Big Finish is anything less than excellent the vast, vast, vast majority of the time, but these classics really do feel like they're on a different level. And yeah, there is that passion project factor that, you know, we talked about when we did Not Who Won. But do you think that just because they know they're taking on some pretty sort of meaty, some pretty well regarded material, it just kind of ups the game a little bit all round?
You could make, and this is going to sound unfair. This is going to sound like I'm criticizing Big Finish, and it's truly not. But you can sometimes feel like the Doctor Who stuff is on a little bit of a um. Again, it's not a term I enjoy, but it feels applicable here. It's almost like a sort of conveyor belt, but that's their bread and butter. That's what the main bulk of their output is. Whereas when something like this comes along, and even the likes, I get it as well from the likes of The Prisoner, from some of the full cast Jerry Anderson stuff like Space 1999, where it's almost like this, like they're taking something of a busman's holiday to go and work on something that they really, really love, and is just a bit different from their day to day in Doctor Who. And it's things like this that really shine, because, as I've said, you get the care and attention put into it, in a way. It's because, do you know where I'm coming from when I'm saying that it's
Yeah.
out of the ordinary? It's like their little side project that they like, that they go and work on to clear their head. If I'm maybe projecting there, but that's the closest analogy I can come up with for these stories. And they feel all the better for it because they're getting that little bit of extra care and attention.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean, and it's not to do down any of the sort of more regular stuff we have from Big Finish, the Doctor Who, the Blake Seven, the whatever. But it's definitely it always does feel special when a classic or an original, I suppose, but particularly a classic is announced, and it's because there's so much talent not just at Big Finish regularly, but that want to work with Big Finish, that do fairly regularly work with Big Finish. That it means that when they do something like this, they can pull out all the stops and they can bring in, an actor of Richard Armitage's caliber. He's a very, very busy actor. He's in absolutely all sorts. But if they can pin him down for a few days to do something like this, and he's willing to do it, which he quite clearly is, yeah, go for it, and let's make something particularly special.
In terms of the story of it as well, I always find this is the paradox of being a fan of the classics range. It's where I love the stories that are told. I'm loving the Big Finish versions of these stories, but in a lot of cases, I've never read the original. And I've never read the War of the Worlds, so I've no idea how closely this hews to it, or if it sort of departs from it. All I can enjoy, all I can say about this is I really enjoy it just as a standalone audio drama. It's really well, it's extremely well written. It's extremely well performed, and as I've said there, the final production of it all is absolutely stellar. I think this won a whole I think this won a lot of awards whenever it came out or shortly after it came out. It very, very much deserves them.
It's one thing that I've noticed about quite a few Nick Briggs projects, and it was Nicholas Briggs who adapted and directed this one. The soundscape work is just incredible. I mean, it was the same with Jekyll and Hyde, which has come out more recently, there was some very, very, very excellent sound design in it as well, and that it almost feels like it begins with an overture. It really sort of puts you into a certain mood, makes you feel a certain atmosphere with minimal to no dialogue. It's purely sound design, and it's beautifully done. It really is sort of masterful sound radio direction. And yeah, it just instantly this drew me in, and it made me feel exactly what Nicholas Briggs wanted me to feel, and it sort of put me in that mindset so that as I listened to it, I was sort of experiencing something that, as we've already said, is particularly great, particularly special. And I was very, very sort of receptive to that because of that really strong opening. I feel like we've gone all highbrow just talking about it.
We'll never be highbrow. We'll never be
No,
highbrow.
no, Spodcast, not highbrow. I think we need that including in the logo somewhere. But no, it truly is a really, really, really good piece of audio drama. It's an excellent production, and I'm so glad that they've, like you say, it's stuff that everybody's aware of, and chances are everyone's experienced in some way, but maybe you've not read the original book. I don't think there are as many people picking up and reading H.G. Wells as there are watching a film based on his work, or listening to something like this, or that kind of thing. I mean, War of the Worlds, I think the way I've experienced it the most is on vinyl, and it's that bloke called Jeff with the copyright again. It really is just an absolutely fantastic piece, and it has actually kind of made me go, you know what, I do want to read this. I think I read it a long, long, long time ago. There are bits of it that I remember. I'm sure I must have read that. But I'd certainly like to revisit the book. Because it's done brilliantly here, and it's done brilliantly. The Tom Cruise film and the musical, all of it. It's just fantastic. So yeah, a really, really, really strong piece, and I'm glad we've started on it because it's a strong start. Shall we move on to the second H.G. Wells related listening that we've done for this episode?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Now, this is one that I probably wouldn't have listened to first, based on the H.G. Wells that I've yet to hear. So I've now heard Shape of Things to Come. We discussed that in Not Who 1, and that was just fantastic. I loved that, and I think it still is actually the strongest of the ones that I've listened to, the three that I've listened to. Martian Invasion of Earth was the obvious next one to go to. It's probably the most well-known of all of the... War of the Worlds is probably the most well-known of all of the things that have been adapted. Invisible Man, it's a story I've heard of. It's a character I'm familiar with, but beyond bloke goes invisible, I probably couldn't actually have told you anything about it before listening to it. There's so many sort of notable things about this. It is probably a story that everybody's heard. I don't think I'm alone in having heard of The Invisible Man as an H.G. Wells story. But it's we've got John Hurt as the Invisible Man, and just incredible. One of the greatest performances Big Finish have ever recorded, I think, and that really is saying something. There's so much to love here, and I'm really, really glad that I did listen to it. And I'm almost ashamed to say that I only listened to it because you said you wanted to talk about it in this episode. So I'll let you go first. You talk about it, and then I'll continue gushing about how amazing it is.
This was possible. I think whenever I was sort of getting into Big Finish, this was about the time I got into Big. Whenever I was getting into Big Finish, I sort of bought CDs from the likes of Amazon or Forbidden Planet, And it wasn't until maybe 2 or 3 years in that I started getting, just ordering directly from Big Finish and getting the downloads as well. And I think The Invisible Man was one of the first classics I got. Possibly, not 100% sure. And it was, mostly on the strength of John Hurt being in it, but I'd heard great things about this version of it. Again, there's an excellent cast here. It's led by John Hurt and Blake Ritson. And the two of them are I'm about to call John Hurt a superb actor, and that feels like understatement. John Hurt was legendary, but Blake Ritson is fantastic as well. His voice is incredible, and he absolutely holds his own alongside Hurt in this. You've got Annette Badland in there as well, I'm pretty sure. It's Dan Starkey has one or two roles, and does brilliantly in them, including playing, I think, for maybe a scene or two, the younger version of Griffin. And it's great. Um I again, it's not one that I have ever read the original of, but I get the impression just from listening to it that it probably hews quite close to the original. And it's the way it's described, the way it's narrated and described in dialogue. You can visualize what's happening really easily, including what is quite a visual transformation, just in terms of the description involved, of Griffin going from ordinary to invisible. There's talk of the particles of his skin fading, leaving the bones and the nerves, and you can visualize that really easily. So that's very, very well done and very well adapted into audio. That you can see Griffin in his lab. At least I find it very easy to see Griffin in his lab, slowly becoming invisible. So yes, again, I actually was just checking here while speaking, just to see. I have a strong suspicion this was maybe John Hurt's last ever performance. I don't think it was the last to come out. I think, just off the top of my head, the last War Doctor set came out after this. But I suspect, just in terms of the recording dates, they're not actually listed on the Big Finish website for at least one of the War Doctor sets. I suspect this was maybe John Hurt's last recorded performance, so it feels very special in that regard. If that is true, I'm not claiming that is true. It's just I think it might be. It feels very special in that regard, and it's an incredible, final performance if it is indeed so.
It's amazing, really, that we've got so far into this podcast. I mean, we're episode 70 is this, something like that now? I think just beyond. We've got so far in without talking about how amazing John Hurt is, and he genuinely was in. As the Doctor. He came along and convinced us that he was the Doctor in 80 minutes, and I'm not sure any actual Doctor actor has done that. So yeah, he was just phenomenal, and I'm really, really glad that Big Finish managed to do something with him that wasn't a Time War set, a War Doctor set. And this is it's fantastic. And I was listening to it, kicking myself that I hadn't listened to it before. Like, this has been around for quite a while now, and I've not got to listening to it. And it's mad that I haven't, because it's just so good. And John Hurt's so good. I think that, as you say, the entire cast is fantastic. Hurt's performance is incredible, but he's surrounded by people that do indeed hold their own, and just kind of enhance that performance. I think it's a brilliant adaptation. I'm not that familiar with the original, as I said, but the story is very clear. It's very well done. It's beautifully scripted. I'd love to read the book and kind of figure out how much of the dialogue is lifted from the pages and how much is part of the adaptation. But either way, it's just brilliant. It's an excellent piece of listening. It's a great way to spend a couple of hours. And I feel as though that I have now experienced the story that I was genuinely missing out by not having sort of made myself familiar with before.
Did you know? I'm interested to see because there's something that pops up in this story that does also occur in another of the H.G. Wells stories. It turns up in The First Men in the Moon. Um, but there's something here, and I only listened to The First Men in the Moon for the first time, while preparing for this podcast. So I didn't fully. There's a reference in The Invisible Man that I now realize was a reference to The First Men in the Moon, but there's a mention of this um, from I've forgotten the name of the character, but it's the guy who and he's the vagrant that helps Griffin and ends up running the pub that Dr. Kemp meets, and that's the one he's sort of narrating from.
Yeah.
The character is with him. He makes mention of a government agency who sort of look into strange happenings, and I always thought that was maybe a little bit of a sneaky Big Finish reference to Torchwood or something like that.
The same thing crossed my mind when I was listening to it, yeah.
That organization, and again, I suspect this is maybe them diverge. I've never read The First Men in the Moon, but I suspect this is a divergence from what happens in the text. But that organization does appear; it's never named in The First Men in the Moon. And it could easily be Torchwood. You don't even have to squint. Did you know that there is a sequel to The Invisible Man at Big Finish? Came out shortly after, but was never announced as such.
I did not.
You don't know which range it's in?
No.
This is a spoiler warning for people. Turn off now and go away if you don't know what the sequel is, or you don't want to know what the sequel is. But it's Sherlock Holmes and the Fleet Street Transparency. It involves Holmes and Watson investigating. It's a Christmas special. It was in the Master of Blackstone Grange box set, but it is available standalone as well. Um, it involves Holmes and Watson investigating, sort of like, and just looking into a set of strange occurrences around Fleet Street. There's a newspaper editor whose articles are being rewritten overnight, and it ultimately transpires that it is Dr. Kemp responsible. He has succeeded in making himself invisible. And it's Holmes figures out. Holmes is aware of the Iping case, is aware of who Dr. Kemp is, and works out that the Invisible Man is in the room with them at one stage. So that was not announced as an Invisible Man sequel. I listened to that and it blew my mind. It's Blake Ritson playing Dr. Kemp again. It is just a straight up sequel to this classic in the Sherlock Holmes range. But it ends with a sort of tease that that something dark and ominous is on the way, and it might involve maybe perhaps one or two more Victorian heroes. And it hasn't. I don't know if I'm not aware of it having come out or anything else having been done with it. This came out must have been about 2017. But I always took it as a sort of a little bit of a hint that there might be a sort of Victorian version of the Avengers, or a Big Finish take on the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen with Holmes and the Invisible Man and whoever else. And I don't think it's come to fruition yet. I'm still waiting on it. I'm still very excited for it.
Now that I would be very, very interested in listening to. Now I've not, I have heard some Big Finish Holmes, but only when he crosses over into other things. So there's a crossover with Dorian Gray. So I have heard that, and I've heard other little bits here and there, but all-consuming fire, obviously. The Big Finish Sherlock Holmes range is still on my to-do list, and I strongly suspect that may pop up in Not Who 3 in hopefully not a full year's time. But that's definitely something I would like to get to at some point. My listening seems to be very, very Doctor Who focused at the moment. And I think I'm just trying to do some favourites because we're in anniversary territory, and you've done something similar, haven't you?
Yes, I did a big playlist over the summer, which was sort of inspired by there was a marathon on the Drama Channel in the UK back in 2013 or 2014, sort of around the time of the 50th anniversary, um, which I was very excited for because I never ever had any of the classic Doctor Who DVDs or anything, until I went to uni. It was for a couple of years after that. But it was the only, it was I was gonna it was the first time I saw a fair amount of classic Who. It was the first time I ever saw Pyramids of Mars. I had never seen Earthshock or any before. I caught a little bit, so it was the only one I managed to catch in full was the TV movie. Which I made. I deliberately said to my parents, I knew we're going out. That's the Sunday it was on. I said I want to be home by this time that I can sit down and watch the Doctor Who movie when it's repeated. Um, it was sort of inspired by that. They took just a favorite, sort of like a really strong episode for a really strong serial from each Doctor and just broadcast them over 8 weeks. It was all the classic Doctors, and I just do that now every year, every summer. I just pick a favorite story for each Doctor from Big Finish and just run them out one after the other. Go from one, two, three, four, all the way up. And that used to be that you had to skip certain Doctors. Now you can do a complete run between Doctors 1 and Doctor 10, with every
which
version of the Doctor represented.
which is brilliant, really. Which is something you couldn't have done at Big Finish even a few years ago,
No, it's
full
wonderful.
cast at least. Yeah, that's great. It's a great way of doing it. But yeah, I'll come back to my listening in a little bit. But obviously, I've taken a bit of a break for these not Who things. Although I think we've talked about Doctor Who so much, we probably need to call this not Who.
Not quite, not Who.
Not quite not Who. Um, but yeah, The Invisible Man, it really was, again, another incredibly strong bar pushing, bar raising, I guess, piece from Big Finish. They knew they were adapting something strong, they knew they were doing something special, and they threw everything at it, including what, as you say, may well be John Hurt's final performance. And if it is, hell of a final performance, it's really, really brilliant.
It
Um,
feels again, and I know this is me slating Big Finish, or it might sound like me slating Big Finish. It's honestly not, but it feels right that John Hurt's final performance gets to be him taking on a classic role, and it's not him playing the Doctor. It feels right that it's something like this, a sort of cinematic, very very. Taking on one of the literary great characters in Griffin, taking on a truly classic character, and portraying him so well. It feels really genuinely right that that was John Hurt's last performance, possibly.
I'd agree, and it certainly wasn't the first iconic character that he played and fantastic role that he played. So yeah, it is, I agree, quite sort of fitting that he got to do something like that, even right at the end. And it really is a shame that we didn't get a lot more of John Hurt, not just as the Doctor as well, but at Big Finish. I think that we were really, really lucky that we did get some really good stuff with him, and everything he did, he was just absolutely amazing. And it's great to have him associated with this lovely little audio drama company that we like listening to. Shall we? Shall we edge on?
Yes, let's.
Let's. And it's really, it was just to talk about another absolutely incredible actor that is very sadly no longer with us, but was associated with Big Finish. Obviously, we had Shilling and Sixpence, which Big Finish released a second series of. I think it was towards the end of last year now. And it obviously starred David Warner alongside Celia Imrie. And again, David Warner did some amazing stuff with Big Finish, and it was wonderful and diverse. And Shilling and Sixpence is one of the more fun Big Finish classic, not classic, sorry, originals. I think it's sort of it's quite self-aware. It's obviously an adaptation of a it's like a traveling stage show, isn't it? A serial, um, and it's really good that we've just got this version that we can listen to on audio. And again, it's got a cracking cast. And but David Warner was, an excellent lead in this, and it's somebody else that has, left us within. It's just over a year ago now, I think, and we're really still feeling the loss. It's at the time of recording, we know that there's another David Warner Doctor Who due to come. We think it's part of Once and Future, though it's not announced yet. And now
It
I've
it
said
it
that, probably
it
will
it,
be by the time.
it has been announced that he is playing the Unbound Doctor in Once and Future, so it is going to be one of those.
Yes, yes, it has.
They
But
just
we've
haven't announced
not,
which yet.
at the time of recording, we've not had any kind of story details about that. I keep saying at the time of recording because we have done this one a couple of weeks in advance, and the Big Finish news train has tripped us up a few times before. So, but yeah, I'm very much looking forward to sort of hearing David Warner as the Doctor for one last time, and I love the fact that he's been included amongst, the quotation marks proper Doctors in Once and Future, because the Unbound Doctor absolutely is a Doctor, a genuine incarnation of the Doctor. And yeah, I love the fact that David Warner as well loved working with Big Finish and was a series lead in Shilling and Sixpence. It's an awful lot of fun. It's the kind of thing where I don't think it works as a bingeable piece. The way I listen, I tend to binge things. I will do sort of an entire Doctor Who story at once. I won't break it up episode by episode or whatever. Whereas I genuinely think Shilling and Sixpence is one of those things where you should probably just do an episode a day and then you come back to it after a bit of time. But it works really well. It's a lot of fun. Anything you want to add about it?
Yeah, it's. I've only heard the first series, and I've only heard it once, and it's one I perhaps need to revisit. But I just love that there is this sort of David Warner and Celia Emery cozy crime audio series. It just feels like one of those things that should exist. It's you know someone pointed out recently that British TV or British popular fiction, I suppose, mainly is comprised of detective stories and quaint villages, and that just fulfills this, in its entirety. It's a little bit. I remember some of the characters feeling a little bit sort of strange and unusual. I'd maybe have preferred a slightly more grounded tone. You can still do, um, you know, whimsical characters and whatnot, but this felt it's maybe slightly too far in that regard for my personal tastes. But you cannot fault David Warner and you cannot fault Celia Emery. In their roles, they are fantastic. And I will at some stage come back to revisit this series, and I will get around to doing the second one as well.
It's definitely worth doing series two, although I do have to admit, I guessed who done it pretty early on. Like I kind of had it figured out fairly early, but maybe that's just me being cynical and a bit of a smart ass. I don't know. um, anyhow, let's move on to the next thing on our list, and that is one that I know absolutely nothing about. So, Connor, take to the floor and tell us all about Captain Scarlet.
My time has come. um, Captain Scarlet was my big love before Doctor Who was my big love, and Doctor Who never stopped being my big love. Um, Whenever I got into it, I sort of forgot a bit about Captain Scarlet and about Thunderbirds and about those other lovely shows. Which one of my earliest and most favourite memories is sitting with my dad I got to stay up late. I was tiny, but I got to stay up late, and I got to watch Captain Scarlet all night with my dad. I don't know how that happened. I suspect my mum was probably away. Um, but that's I remember very, very vividly the two of us doing that, and it is genuinely one of my happiest memories. So when Big Finish announced, and I remember the video reveal for it was incredible, because it was one of those ones that they put out that they don't quite reveal what it is in the text. They just sort of put the video out and a little bit of a tease line. I remember they did the same when Christopher Eccleston was announced, that you had to watch the video to get the reveal. And I started watching this video, and it's in a sort of gloomy cemetery, and it's pulling back through the fog and the mist. Um, and the Misteron rings just slide across one of the gravestones, and it plays the wee drum sting from Captain Scarlet, and I nearly died. That was whenever they announced the first couple of sets for Captain Scarlet's 50th anniversary. I was delighted that I was going to get some Captain Scarlet on audio alongside all this lovely new Doctor Who on audio that I had just discovered. Um, so for this podcast, I listened to the most recent one, which was, again, it was a surprise reveal. And the week before it came out, I just happened, I'd watched some Doctor Who on BritBox, I had a little bit of time to kill, and I put on an episode of Captain Scarlet just to pass the time. It was, I think it's called Seek and Destroy, and that episode basically involves the Angel's aircraft being taken over by Mysterons, and attacking Captain Scarlet and some of the other Spectrum agents on the ground. My brother, who would never in a million years have deigned, in my mind, to sit down and watch this sort of thing, he'd consider, it wouldn't be his cup of tea at all. He sat down and watched it, and he ended up really hooked on this one particular episode. So that was the week before this came out, or the week before I listened to it, rather. And I went in, I knew nothing about it. It's the most recent Captain Scarlet release at the time of recording is, I think it's called The Martian Menace. It's a sequel to that episode, and I I couldn't believe it when I started listening. It starts off in similar sort of circumstances, tying into the events from that episode, and sort of picks up and follows it on into a different story. So I was thrilled. That couldn't, talk about serendipity. Um, it's a decent story. It's adapted, I think, from one of the old TV comics or action comics, or it's not action comics. That was Superman, but TV 21 comic strips. That was it. It's adapted from one of those, so it's a little bit, even more than the TV show. It's a little bit more um, sort of very retro sci-fi, but I can sort of hone in on the production of it, because um, I think Wayne Forrester's a fantastic actor. He voices all the male roles in the Captain Scarlet Spectrum files, and does fantastically at sort of getting into the different voices, getting very close to the original cast and sort of replicating their performances. Um, I was delighted when I heard he was going to do them as well, because he was the version of Captain Scarlet from the newer TV series, which I loved, as well as the original. And I'm delighted that it's him. He has come back to do these um, stories for Big Finish, which are sort of, they use the imagery from the original series, but I'm delighted that it's the newer voice of Captain Scarlet is still doing them. Um, and I will end on a wish for more, please. I think they've adapted all the novels they're possibly able to. Not 100% sure about that. A lot of the Jerry Anderson stuff seems to be adapted from novels and comic strips. I am all for Big Finish and Anderson Entertainment doing new stories. I think it would be a real shame to waste the talents, or not to waste, but to sit on the talents of the various people involved here, and just continue to do the adaptations. I would love some new Captain Scarlet stories, some new Thunderbird stories. Like, we're getting new Space 1999 stories in that series. I would love to see the others, the other series get that same sort of treatment.
Well, fingers crossed it'll keep going, and fingers crossed at some point I'll find the time to kind of sit down and figure out what it's all about, because I have to admit that pretty much all Jerry Anderson stuff has just entirely passed me by. I've managed to go for over 30 years without really experiencing any of it at all. But yeah, it's and this is one of the great things about Big Finish. Really, is it can be easy to forget that it's not all Doctor Who. It's not just this, as we sort of said before, a bit like a conveyor belt of Doctor Who. And I love the Doctor Who stuff. It's why we're here. It's why we do this podcast. But yeah, it is great that they do stuff like Jerry Anderson. And one day I will get to do my Big Blake Seven podcast episode. I nearly managed it when me and Rob Valentine chatted about it for 2 minutes when he joined us. But one day we will do a full Blake Seven episode. But yeah, it's fantastic that there are all these different ranges and lines that we can follow. And, you know, I like I say, I don't follow the Jerry Anderson stuff at all. But if I ever do find myself in front of the Captain Scarlet series, I can go straight to Big Finish for even more afterwards. And yeah, it is great that they do keep finding these absolutely fantastic series to continue to work on to bring us more of. Yeah.
See, the thing with the Jerry Anderson stuff is, I think, from my point of view, a lot of the appeal is mainly in the TV series and the fact that all the vehicles and like all the Thunderbirds and all the planes and cars and tanks and whatnot in Captain Scarlet all look really damn cool, and they all blow a lot of things up. You know, that was what my brother was getting into when we watched that episode. There was a bit where a couple of the Angel planes sort of dive bomb and let off all these rockets, and my brother was really impressed that there's all these, because it's all practical effects. You know, it's they're genuinely blowing stuff up, and it's very exciting. I think with the Big Finish stuff, it sort of keys in and taps more into the nostalgia of remembering watching that stuff as a kid. More so than the Doctor Who stuff does. Like Doctor Who, you know, you're getting these new stories. It's exciting to hear these old characters getting brand new stories. Whereas I think with the Captain Scarlet and Thunderbirds Big Finishes, it's definitely more sort of like reminding you of watching those episodes. And sort of trades more on the nostalgia of, I can remember when you're a kid and you used to watch those things, and you remember what the Thunderbirds looked like and how cool they looked when they were flying, that sort of thing, rather than sort of doing, as I say, those newer stories with, you know, because they're very visual series, and they're very visual, sort of very action based, which I think is maybe why so many of them so far have taken a more narrated format, because it's easier to get that action across.
Yes, I can definitely understand that. But it's another joy of Big Finish that they have for quite some time now juggled formats, played with different formats, and mixed and matched and merged, and it always seems to have worked quite well. So yeah, I guess it's one of the glorious freedoms of audio as a medium. But yeah, Big Finish do seem to utilize it at its best. We'll move on to our sort of final point of discussion then, and it is something we've already kind of touched on in this episode, but it does deserve its own proper discussion. It's Transference, which was a Big Finish original that came out, was it 3-4 years ago now? I think it was it 2019 or 20, something like that?
I think it must have been 2019, because I remember the job I was in at the time. I remember listening to that at my desk. So yes, I think that was about 2019.
August 2019, according to the Big Finish app. I've just found it. And
Hooray!
it's huge. It's massive for a Big Finish release. It's 8 hours long, it's 6 hours long. I can never remember. It's 8 hours, isn't it?
It's see, a lot of the episodes sort of come in around 45 or 50 minutes.
Yeah.
But it is an 8-episode series, which is massive indeed for Big Finish.
So if it was ITV on a Sunday evening with breaks, it'd be 8 hours. We'll go with that. Yeah, it's a very, very, very big, long story for a Big Finish release, and it is a serial. It is one long story with a team of writers, and I, I genuinely struggle to believe that we've not quite had something like this since. Because in my view at least, it's a runaway success. It's a proof of concept that Big Finish can sort of get in on that kind of gritty British conspiracy drama type thing, which is, it's been popular for well over 2 decades, and it's going to continue to be popular for ages as well.
It always sort of brings to mind, what was that one that had Keely Hawes and what's his face, who was going to be James Bond for a while, but then hasn't turned out to be. Um, Bodyguard. It was that one. It sort of always brings that sort
Yes,
of tone and feel to mind.
yeah,
Um,
that kind of Jeb Mercurio line of duty kind of,
yeah,
yeah, absolutely. Um, and it's sort of it's got bits of going back a bit further, things like State of Play and all that sort of thing as well. It's absolutely great, and I kind of think that Big Finish are missing a trick by not doing more of this kind of thing. Um, the one thing I will say about it is it sets itself up as, or sort of describes itself as being perhaps more of a psychological drama than it actually ends up being. Sort of the tagline is, "If a fantasist told you they killed someone, would you believe them?" That's kind of done and dusted within the first couple of episodes, and we're into proper conspiracy territory. So it doesn't quite stick to its initial question, but it evolves into something that is arguably more gripping of a premise. Um, but yeah, so Transference, what are your thoughts?
it is undoubtedly one of the best things Big Finish have ever released. I feel like I say that a lot, but this is absolute top drawer stuff. Um, it just really does show that the Big Finish team can turn their hand to creating this really sort of serious, as everyone calls it, a Sunday night drama, because it is a Sunday night drama. It feels like you should be watching this at 9 o'clock, um, just as the watershed hits, sort of thing. Um, it really does have that feel. Um, has this ever turned up on like Radio 4 or something? Because it feels like it belongs there. Um,
Not that I'm aware of, but I wouldn't be surprised if it had.
it feels exactly the sort of thing that they would go for. Again, stunning cast. Alex Kingston. Um, again, Big Finish making very excellent use of their um, contacts and the people that Doctor Who has allowed them to work with, that they get to bring them in and do projects like this. Um, she sounds like she's absolutely brilliant in this. She couldn't be further from River for a start. And it's really, really good to hear her in a role that's not River. Even though I love River to bits, this is a really, really good change of pace. This is a really, really um, interesting and exciting and engaging series. Um, it feels, it takes a wee bit of a turn. It does almost feel like two Big Finish 4 episode box sets that have been released as one product, because you get through the first 4 episodes and that's very sort of domestic. You're based in Sam's office, in her house, in her sister's house, um in cars and motorways, and sort of very grounded and realistic and recognizable locations. Um and 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 they have sort of very recognizable, relatable, the conversations. All it feels very grounded and realistic, I suppose. Um and then you get to episode 4, and spoiler warning, abandon all hope, all ye who pass beyond this point. Episode 4 ends with her policeman friend getting killed. Um, and then the rest of the set takes on a little bit more of a high octane approach. with assassins and corporations and hitmen and conspiracies and whatnot. And it does sort of drift away from that. The whole sort of at the time, I remember the marketing for this had came up with psychotherapist, and it sort of split up the word psycho and therapist. It's that sort of relationship between Keith and Sam. Um, I suppose is what that's alluding to. It sort of moves away from that more in the second one as we learn that Sam is actually not the baddie that Sam suspects him to be in the first half. Um, but they're both sides of that coin, I suppose. Both sides of this series are both in their own way really gripping and as I said earlier, interesting and engaging and exciting and all sorts of other words. Um, and this is, I try not to come back to this too often because it always feels really really good when I do get to listen to it, and I try and keep that sort of heavy hitting of it, that I'm not getting too used to it. Um, so yes, I'm, as I'm sure you can tell, I can't sing the praises of this highly enough. It definitely has to be one of the go-to recommends for people who maybe want to listen to Big Finish and want to maybe get away from Doctor Who for a bit. That would be one of the series. Would surely be at the top of that list.
I used it as a palate cleanser after a pretty hefty marathon earlier in the year. I'd done basically everything Third Doctor related Big Finish had ever released, which took me a good couple of months. And I just wanted to kind of get Unit and Joe Grant and all that kind of thing out of my head before I moved on to more Doctor Who. Because obviously Pertwee Doctor Who, Third Doctor Who is very, very kind of not formulaic, but it's definitely got a bit of a template that a lot of it is cut from. And this was just the perfect sort of snap back to reality, to something different. And it's absolutely excellent. It's really well plotted, really well paced. It does sort of turn on its head halfway through when her friend is killed, and all of a sudden it becomes quite a different story. It moves at a different pace, and it starts asking more questions to keep you hooked. Just in case the initial few mysteries were starting to bore you, there's a load more stuff to kind of go with here. And it does perhaps cross into slightly ridiculous territory by the time it gets to the end, but very few stories don't. It has to, the format kind of dictates that the ante has to be upped before the finale. We keep talking about Sunday night BBC ITV dramas. They all do it, so why shouldn't this? I'd love to see this kind of thing a bit more often, and I think that if Big Finish were ever going to sort of start experimenting with releasing things in a bit more of a serialized format, this would be the way to do it. Could we perhaps have it released on 8 consecutive weeks? Could we have an episode a week? And then could the CD with the full thing get sent out afterwards? Maybe that kind of thing. There's definitely room for that sort of thing. And I think digital delivery is probably now the primary way that Big Finish customers receive it. I don't know. I'm not a huge CD customer anymore, although I'm the first person to buy something when it comes out on vinyl. But I'm assuming that most people listen to their Big Finish digitally now. I'm assuming that they're using the app or they're downloading the files from the website on the day of release. And I think that does actually enable Big Finish to release things in more of a serialized format than they have done in the past. I guess we've kind of played with it a bit. We had Double at the start of the year, the Torchwood 2-parter that we kind of got a few weeks apart and that sort of thing. We're getting a Once and Future each month at the moment. So maybe it is something they could start moving towards. But this kind of thing, picking up an episode each week, I'd absolutely love it.
They did it with Dark Shadows. I don't listen to Dark Shadows. I've never listened to Dark Shadows, but I think they did that with Dark Shadows. One of the last series they did
Yes.
was it was weekly release, wasn't it?
Um, I can't remember if it was daily or weekly, but there was some kind of. So I also don't really follow Dark Shadows, but there was definitely some kind of serialized release, and it was done that way, and it's. I'm surprised it's something they don't do more often. It feels like a potentially easy win for them. And it's something like Transference. It would have me hooked. I'd genuinely be going to download the latest episode every, I don't know, Tuesday morning, whatever. Um, so yeah, that's definitely something that we could be maybe getting in the future. It could definitely work, and I think a release like Transference is absolutely the way to do it.
It builds interest. I think it builds like I remember when Dalek Universe was coming about, out, and it was coming out sort of on the regular Big Finish, 3 months per box set, sort of schedule. Dark or Dalek Universe felt like a really genuine community experience for Doctor Who in the middle of the pandemic. I remember people, there was a lot of talk about it online, because it was, David Tennant was doing a series that'll never happen again on TV. Let's do it with Big Finish. Um, you know, and that felt like I said at the time. I said this feels like they've done a great big tentpole release, and they're um, putting it out a wee bit at a time, and it's generating all this conversation. I'd love them to do that again at some stage. I don't know that Once and Future has quite hit the same buttons for me in that regard, but it is something I would love to see them do. Something like Transference would be perfect for that.
I think the closest example this year would probably be the new series of Torchwood Among
Yeah,
Us, which was 3 sets released over 3 consecutive months. And I sort of wish they'd have done it in a way that even if they were releasing it in box sets of 3 episodes, they could have perhaps done each one 3 weeks apart. So if you wanted to take the one a week approach, you could have done. Um, but no, they were sort of dropped quite far apart. I think the first one was the start of a month, the second one was the middle, and the third one was the end. So it was more like a 6 week gap in between each set. But yeah, I think that again, it's just something that they should perhaps start experimenting with. We've got this very, very, very well at this stage established digital distribution method. We've got an app that lets you download any Big Finish you own at the push of a button. Perhaps there's room for something like this, something a little more serialized.
I hope so. I've just realised what it was actually with Dalek Universe that sort of drew, I think, what sort of drew the community conversation into it. It was the cliffhangers. Each of those sets ended on a cliffhanger. And one of them, I suppose, to some extent, still hasn't been resolved. One of those, so the first set in that was, the Doctor and Anya were unconscious at the hands of a potentially evil Mark. The second box set was, oh gosh, River Songs in this. The Dalek turned up and saying, hello, sweetie. We're going to get David Tennant and Alex Kingston. Hurrah. The third one ends with Anya getting a little bit blown up, and then I think it does reveal she's still alive and well, but living out of her own time. We still haven't got a follow up with Anya. I would love there to be one, but I think it's that sort of thing where you're getting a regular release. There's going to be a series coming out, but you're getting cliffhangers that like that to keep the conversation going in the meantime. This is all just me adding on to what you've been saying about, yes, please, more of this sort of weekly or monthly release format, just to draw out the suspense and build up that excitement. It's really, really worthwhile and really, really effective sort of format for that.
It's definitely worth seeing where that kind of thing could go, I think. But maybe it's in the plan, maybe it's not. We never know. It's nice to speculate, and it's nice to kind of maybe look at it this way. And at the end of the day, with something like Transference, there's absolutely nothing stopping us from doing an episode a week while we listen to it, because, as I said, it's all available on the app at the touch of a button. But yeah, I think that is pretty much all we have time for. This has ended up being quite a long episode, but it's because we don't talk about Big Finish's non-Doctor Who output enough, really, and there's a lot there to enjoy. We've kind of only sort of started to look at it, even though we've done 2 episodes of this. There's so much more to go for, and I mean, I could talk about Transference till the cows come home. It's just it's an absolutely great suspenseful piece of audio drama. But yeah, it's we shall leave it there for now. We shall return to the subject of Not Who sometime in the future, though, probably when I've listened to Sherlock Holmes. But meanwhile, I will say thank you very much for joining me, Connor.
Thank you very much. This has been a really, really fun one to do.
And I'm sure we'll be back for more Not Who in the future at some point, and we will definitely be back for more spodcasting next week. So goodbye now.